Hello, everybody. Jimmy here, veganic grower here with you. And it's a pleasure. Today, it's a beautiful day here in Boileau, Quebec. It's 20 degrees Celsius. It is shining sunshine. It's a little bit of a breeze. It's just beautiful. Great day to be outside. However, for us, it's still been freezing at night. Gosh, it got down to -1 last night, the night before also. So even though there's some things growing out there, we're holding back on some of the tender annuals. So all the tender annuals actually. But what do we have out there now? We have our first rapinis and mustard greens and lettuces all germinating, carrots and parsnips. We have our first cabbages planted, onions planted, leeks planted. The garlic is growing strong. So it's very, very beautiful. I'm going to say hello to some people out there. Hello, Meg. That's cool. You have chives and scallions. And Rhonda, high desert in Spokane County, Washington. Sunny 65 degrees. Cool. So I'm going to start it off with a couple of housekeeping items for everyone. So if you have picked up my book and if you've read it, do me a favor if you can and put a review somewhere. Put a review either on Goodreads or your favorite bookstore site or Amazon if you aren't opposed to them, just to help spur the algorithm a little bit. The book is doing very, very well, but I've noticed that the amount of reviews out there are not that many. And I think it's probably because a lot of you are like me and you don't do a lot of reviews because it's just not something that we do. But if you can think about it, it would be a pleasure to me, and I would be deeply grateful if you would leave a review. So thank you. What else was I going to say as a housekeeping item? Oh, that's it for housekeeping. Okay. So I'm going to start this off with something that I've had some conversations over the last few weeks, and what I've noticed is that people are starting to become a little bit disenfranchised with growing their own gardens, either as homesteaders or just small gardeners and even small farmers. Here in Quebec, actually, we're seeing a very dramatic decrease in small scale farms. I think this year alone, we've had almost 30 that have shuttered their doors. And this is a big issue. And it's because climactically, it's difficult to be a farmer. The money isn't quite there for people to be able to pay their expenses. So what I'm going to say is that we all just need to find ways to keep our lives enjoyable. If you're a gardener and you're becoming frustrated because you can't get anything to grow as well as you can, and these shows aren't making your stuff grow better, or what you're eating is not making your gardens grow better, well, all I can say is keep on it. Have determination. It will all come. I know it's arduous. I know it's difficult. But what I can say is keep at it, keep being determined, but also take time for yourself. Take time to smell the wildflowers. Take time to listen to the birds sing and watch them fly. Take time to let your imagination wander, because more than anything else, nature is one of our biggest inspirations. And this goes also towards our activism. As vegan activists, we can become very, very disenfranchised with the lack of support from the people around us or who we're talking to, our families. And I have to say the same thing. Find things that give you personal joy, because if the animals had a say about it, they would tell you to go enjoy your life. Do whatever you can for us to make our lives better, to stop the exploitation of us, but do whatever gives you joy and pleasure in your own life. So that's what I can say. It's very, very important. All right, let's start off the show with a couple of questions. Trish from Gabriola Island, British Columbia, puts out a statement, says, usually we have tons of bees, bumblebees. We've had comfrey for over 23 years and kale always going to flower. When I go and walk outside, usually it's a buzzing heaven, and there are none, just zero. what can be the cause, and is anyone else experiencing this? What I've noticed here is we have just a ton of dandelion blooming everywhere. There's beautiful yellow blooms all over the place. We've made a very concerted effort to let them all go. So, I mean, we've got literally millions of flowers everywhere. And it's not buzzing like you don't bzz every single flower, but they are there. The bees are there. The native bees are there. The bumblebees are there. Um, so they are there. So what I can say is that it is for sure that there are regional situations that happen. I don't know what's happening right now in Gabriola Island. I know that in the West specifically, it is very, very hot these days. That might have an impact. The best things to do is just to continue to expand your flower diversity, as well as leave water out for them, because they are looking not only for that nectar, but they're also looking for water sources. So if there's no water sources anywhere, try to leave them a little bit of water, a little bath, a little tub of water somewhere so they can get a drink. Not so much that they'll drown, because they do like to do that, unfortunately, but enough that they can get themselves a drink, and that might help. But if anybody else is experiencing this, please leave a message or send me one afterwards, because I am very interested, and I'm always, well, I'm a friend to all of our buzzing insect friends. So just let me know what you see or what you observe. Catherine from Quebec City, is there any place where vegan compost can be purchased for those just getting started? Now, this is a question that comes up all the time, and I really wish there was. I really wish there was a national brand of compost that said, veganic compost available here. But unfortunately, it just doesn't exist everywhere. Now, there are certain nurseries that do carry like no poo compost, or even some vegan companies that have started that have created their own compost. What you can do is check your nursery, check your hardware store, and look at the sack. Now, what you're probably going to find more readily is potting soils, potting mixes that are going to say things like perlite, peat moss, petite humus, maybe also dolomite lime. Now, you just got to be careful with something like humus. What I've learned recently is that humus could be another word for compost. So you're just going to have to check with the companies themselves to see if that humus is either like a soil humus, which is basically soil residue from the forest, which is what sometimes people do and put into their mixes, or that it's actually a compost where they're using manure, because now they're getting kind of sneaky and they're not putting it on there. So you just got to be careful. Now, looking at it from a building beds, let's say you're building your beds or you're building raised beds, the best thing I can say about that is use as much native soil as you have available. So don't just fill it full of potting soil or compost that you buy and not use the natural earth that is in your region, because that natural earth is going to have natural microorganisms that your plants are then going to adapt to going further along, especially perennials and biennial plants. So make sure you use as much native soil as you can. Then check to see if nurseries have what's called a live mulch compost. Now, what this is usually is some sort of chipped branch wood or green grass or dried straw, all mixed together, sometimes with kitchen wastes that people are depositing in their brown bins. Again, you got to be careful. Sometimes they put eggshells in there. But you can find these kind of materials. And if you can't, you can at least find at landscaping companies. Usually you can either find some sort of hardwood mulch, which is like a chipped branch wood, which you can use to break down to create your compost pile. Sometimes you can find, even what I found for some folks in New Hampshire over the last couple of weeks is a loam that when they are doing a new construction someplace, they're excavating out some of the land so that they can dig the foundation, and then they sell that loam to a contracting company or a landscaping company. And you can buy that. And sometimes it's really excellent starting soil, like a sandy loam or a clay loam that, no, it doesn't have a huge amount of nutrient in it, but it is a native soil that probably comes closer to your region. The very best thing that you can do is go ahead and start your own compost pile. If you have one, you're in good shape. If you don't have one, build one. And there you go. And that's my advice on that. So thank you, Trish. Thank you, Catherine. As always, I'm here to answer your questions. So if you send it to me on Facebook, send it to me at veganicgrower@gmail.com. I will answer it on our monthly shows. All right, so the show, 7 tips to cucurbit success. Now, what are your cucurbits? Your cucurbits are cucumbers, summer squash, winter squash, and melons. Tip number 1, heat. Want heat to germinate. Cucurbits love hot temperatures. They want at least over 22 degrees or 70 Fahrenheit to germinate. That's at day and at night. And even 26 degrees Celsius or 80 degrees Fahrenheit is not too warm. They can either be direct seeded directly outside when the temperatures are warm enough, or seed them inside. Now, the trick with seeding them inside is do not seed them more than about 3 weeks before planting them outside, because they grow very, very fast once they germinate. And because they don't like root disturbance, you really don't want them to get all root bound in their little cells or their pots or whatever you're planting little seeds in. So heat, inside or outside, it's up to you. Once inside the ground, they will not want to experience temperatures any lower than 11 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Better for them not to experience 13 Celsius or 55 degrees Fahrenheit. This is also known as what's called the warm and settled date. Now, the warm and settled date is basically that period of time when you know that it's not going to freeze again. It might get close. It might get down to 5 or 6 Celsius in the 40s, but it's not going to freeze again. And that's where you know your warm and settled date is, and that's what you're waiting for. After planting, especially here in the north, and I would even do this in southern climates, after planting, the best practice is to cover right away with a floating row cover. The ones we like to use are Agribon 17 or 19. It's a pretty thin, lightweight fabric cover that lets in about 70 to 80% light and also lets in the rain. They will also protect, now that will protect the plants and create a heat trapping effect for the plants, which is very, very cool. That's what they want. They like to have a nice, warm, humid environment while they're growing and getting big. It will also protect them from certain insect pressures. And the ones that are pretty prevalent for all of us are squash bug, squash vine borer, and cucumber beetles. What will end up happening is, since most of these insects, they migrate into our regions from other places, when they fly over, if they don't see them, smell them, or whatever kind of magnetic force they see these cucurbit plants as, if they don't witness them in their own way, they're just going to continue and travel on. And what we notice is that when we put the floating row covers, they really do. They pass by. And you can leave those row covers on all the way until they go to flower. And once they flower, then you're going to have to take it off, because this is one of those families, the Cucurbitaceae, that require pollinating insects. Do you need to rotate these crops? Well, the school is out on that philosophy. Some people say no. Most organic farmers and even small-scale veganic farmers would say absolutely. But it's not going to do anything for the insect pressures. The insects are going to find it, whether you plant it in one space or you've planted a kilometer away. The insects are going to find the plants eventually. Probably the reason why rotation is a good idea is because whatever nematodes or bacterial funguses are living in the soil that attack specifically Cucurbitaceae, if you have the same plant varieties planting over and over and over again, it could cause a buildup of those pathogens that really enjoy those plants. So if you have the space, do it. And if you don't. Now, we did an experiment for the last few years, and that is that we took the straw from all the old cucurbits, which theoretically the agronomes would say, oh, there's going to be larvae of squash bugs and squash vine borers and cucumber beetles in there, and that's not good. You should take all the plants out. You should burn them. You should not use it. I used it. And you know what? We had no more problems than we normally have, which when we do the tactics we use, we have very few problems with little insects that are taking care of our cucurbits. So I like to straw mulch and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in another tip, but I like to straw mulch all of our cucurbits. It helps keep the fruits from not rotting on the ground. And if we use that same straw over and over again, well, it just means that we don't have to procure it some other place or grow it here on the farm. So there you go. Rotate, not rotate. It's up to you. Using the same straw, absolutely. I don't see any problem with it at all. Tip number 2, water, water, water. All cucurbits want consistent watering from seed to the first fruit. Cucumbers, melons, and summer squash, zucchini, to a lesser extent, have a really, really high water content. So it has been said that eating cucumbers actually can stave off dehydration. We know when we bite into a juicy melon that it's just full of water. And even summer squash or zucchini, even though they're drier and they're a little nuttier, they still have a pretty good substantial water content to them, especially when we harvest them small. So be diligent, be consistent in your watering, never letting the roots go dry. It will produce bushier plants, which all cucurbits want to protect their fruit. So it's really a different philosophy than sort of growing a tomato plant. We do want our tomato plants to, Veganic, what's the best slug and snail control method? We tried so many things and only manual removal works. I will go ahead and answer that in a minute. Please, Veganic, tell me where you live. Tomato plants, when you give them a lot of nitrogen, they will create a really big, bushy plant. And it is possible you will also get a lot of flowers, but you may not get a lot of fruits because the plants are putting a lot of energy into being as big as possible. They are really a perennial plant that we grow as an annual. Now, cucurbits, even though there are perennial cucurbits, most of the time they are really, really, really tender annual. They can't survive a lot of the cold temperatures. We're in the UK, very humid, so lots of them. Okay, I'll answer that in a minute. So having a lot of nitrogen in your soils for cucurbit plants, and so that they get big, huge, 3-foot tall, 1 meter tall summer squash and vining winter squash and melons everywhere, it's fine. It doesn't matter, because what you really want, especially for melons and winter squash, is you want those vines to kind of cover and protect all that squash until they're about getting ready, all those melons until they're getting ready, all those cucumbers until they're getting ready, because they can get some sort of a sun scald at a certain moment. Anyway, so it's kind of a different philosophy. You do not mind if your plants get big, and actually the bigger, the more prolific they're going to be when it comes to winter and summer squash. Okay, let me answer your question. What's the best slug and snail control method? We tried so many things and only manual removal works. We do too. What I find is that anytime you can keep the plants drier between the soil level and the plants themselves, you're going to go ahead and have better interactions with slug and snails. They're going to stay where it's more humid. They're not going to climb onto the plants. So what I believe, and we don't have a huge problem here with slugs and snails. We do have them. They're not something that causes a lot of issues, but we use a lot of chip branch wood and we use a lot of dry mulch. And what ends up happening is if we do end up having slugs and snails, they stay underneath and they will go ahead and eat. And because we do weed, but the weeds grow, the wild flora does grow underneath the mulch and the straw. What we'll find is that if we pull the straw back and there are slugs and snails, they will stay there and not actually come onto the plants that we're trying to harvest. So it really is trying to figure out balance. If you're talking lettuces, it's a little bit more touchy. But you can dry mulch or chip branch wood your lettuces. I know it's very humid up there. We can be very humid here as well, but that is really the best option I have. Now, I am a big fan of handpicking any insect. So our biggest issue that we have out here with really all of our plants are gray cutworms. They live in the soil. There's nothing that we can do about them. They come out every year. right about now for the next month, they are just decimating our first rounds of cabbages and kales. They're going to go after our tomato seedlings. They'll go after our onions. So yeah, every day we're out there picking them out. So depending on how big of a scale you are, what I can say is that I can personally do a 50-foot row of cabbages, so 100 cabbage plants, digging around the plants, looking for the gray cutworms. It takes me about 10-15 minutes. So depending on what you're doing, and also if you're selling, I really do believe that the removal method is the best. Some people suggest cardboard. I don't agree. Some people say put wood strips down where you walk and they'll crawl underneath. I'm not so sure I agree. So that is really what I can say. But we have had really good luck, and I've heard a lot of good feedback from people using chipped branch wood as mulch everywhere, especially in the paths, but also around the plants, and dry straw or dry hay. Margaret Henderson, lots of bees in Saskatchewan, lots of dandelions and fruit trees blooming. Awesome. I really believe in this dandelion philosophy. I think that dandelions are nature bees' best friend, and we really need to keep as many as possible. So if our gardens are more planted vegetables, then planted flowers, then we're kind of missing the opportunity for what these native creatures want. And as veganic growers, we should always be looking at our farming and gardening systems as to what nature also wants. And if they want those dandelions, then we need to let them go. Right now, they're starting to die off, and you can go ahead and then weed eat them out before they turn to their white seed pods and fly everywhere. But we should really be letting all native flowers going to flower as much as possible for all of the native insect friends. Rhonda putting out a bunch of information. I've run into an issue with cucumbers for the last several years where female flowers bloom first and the flush die back, and then the flush and male flowers bloom, but never at the same time. This goes on throughout the season. I end up saving pollen and hand pollinating. I've taken to planting parthenocarpic varieties, which is not ideal. I've reached out to growers across the country, and a few are experiencing the same issue. Any ideas? Yes. I am not a fan of parthenocarpic, where the stamen and the pistil are in the same flower. I am not a big fan. I never think that the production is great. Yeah, okay, Veganic. Thanks for answering our question. We only have a small backyard, but one night with no patrol only causes substantial damage. I know, but you know what? It has been also said that 30 to 35% of your plant can be eaten by a critter, by an insect, and they will still come to fruition. So anyway, I know it can't be always easy, but try the dry straw, try the chipped branch wood. I would even put chipped branch wood all throughout your gardens after your plants are established. There's no problem with nitrogen, with a lack of nitrogen uptake. So you shouldn't have a problem at all. Go ahead and plant your seedlings, then go ahead and put the chipped branch mulch down or the dry straw, and I think you might have some luck. Anyway, give it a shot. Let me know how it works out. So I'm not a fan of parthenocarpic varieties. Again, I don't think that they produce all that well. What I am a fan of is looking for old-fashioned varieties, looking for specific varieties that have been planted for a really long time in home gardens. My favorite cucumber varieties are either Lebanese, green finger is one. It's an open-pollinated Lebanese type cucumber that has been growing forever. My favorite pickling cucumber is called Little Leaf H19. It's been grown for the last 60 years. Have always had fantastic luck. And the third one is Market More 76, which has also been like the home gardener's best friend. Stay away from hybrids. There might be something with the flowers there. I would just have to know which type variety that you're planting. Now, the other thing I can say, and I'm going to be talking about that here in just a minute, is make sure you have other flowers blooming, especially wild flowers. Yeah, Market More. So Market More, you shouldn't really have a lot of problems with as long as you have pollinators in the region. I'm going to talk about hand pollination. If you don't have pollinators, then you're gonna have to see what happens. How many cucumber plants that you have planted, that's going to be something else. It seems a little odd to me that the females don't come back. The female flowers don't come back again, because it is very typical for cucurbits that they will put out a flush of either female or male flowers right away. Usually, at least with zucchini, it's male flowers, and then the female flowers come back. So, but they really should be coming every now and then through the same time. Try to plant more, even if they are closer together. If you have, let's say, a 10-foot garden bed, and it's 3 feet wide, I would plant no less than 25 to 30 cucumber plants, maybe even more than that. You might even be able to put 50, but put a lot. And if your soils are really good, okay, I don't know why that would be. The other question would be is that maybe it's the specific seed that you bought it from. I would maybe try another seed company. Maybe there was something bizarre with the seeds that they were saving. Sometimes that's it. It's about the best I could say. And I would plant more. Just plant more plants. Even plant maybe 1 week later. You know what? That's probably the best idea. Plant 20 1 week, a week later, plant 20 more. And then you know what? Then it should equalize. Give it a shot. There's always an answer. We just got to be creative, right? Okay. Tip number 2, finish, water. Tip number 3, best soils. Of course, the best soils are a fertile loam, either clay or sandy loam. But more importantly than the actual loaminess of the soil, the fertility of the soil, is the pH of the soil. Cucumbers and all cucurbits, they do not want to grow in anything with a pH less than 6.0. If it's 5.8, they really just don't like it. So make sure, take a little pH test strip, go ahead and test the pH of your soil and make sure that it is over 6. If it's over 6, you really should have no problem with your cucumber plants proliferating, your zucchini plants proliferating, your melon plants proliferating. I'm saying that actually right. And winter squash plants proliferating. Okay. But even though fertile soils, like I said, that's only so important because I have grown just fantastic melons and cucumbers in basically beach sandstone soil, which is basically just sand almost 2 feet deep. Excuse me, Mitch. You just need to water more. So again, consistent watering. Doesn't really matter the soil. You can even grow in clay. I've grown them in the hardest clay. The difference with clay is that you just got to make sure that they dry out enough before you ever water them again. Continuing on that, once the soil is warmed over to 60, 65 Fahrenheit or 16 to 18 Celsius, that's when you can start mulching with any dry material, either last year's straw, dried hay, chipped branch wood. Last year, I just cut green grass and let it just sit for a day and then put that down, and it just added a nitrogen boost. And I think that's probably why I had just such a great cucurbit year last year also. It will also guard moisture, protect the fruits from insect damage. When you put the straw or the hay down and the fruits are sitting on top of it, they will not get eaten as much by the cutworms or the wire worms or other nematodes that decide to come up, or snails, which will sometimes try to burrow into your and chew on the softer cucumbers. So if they're resting on top of the straw mulch, they won't be touching that wet soil, and those insects won't come at them as readily. Give that a shot. But if you mulch too early, if you mulch when the temperatures of the soil are not that 16 or 18 degrees, what you're going to do is you're going to end up trapping the cold in the soil. So here we plant all of our cucurbits, except the winter squash, about the 15th or 16th of June. That's basically our warm and settled date. We'll plant the winter squash about 10 days earlier, because being that they're 90 days, 100 days sometimes, if we don't, we just won't get them in before the first frost. But we won't mulch them until probably the end of July. And the reason why that is because the temperatures of the soil can still fluctuate, even though we've passed the warm and settled date where the temperatures are staying above 10 degrees at night. There are times where it does get down to 7 or 8, and that cold cools the soil down. So if we don't wait until the soil is warm pretty far down, then what we notice is that we just stunt our cucurbit plants. We actually did this with our artichoke plants last year. We just stunted them because we kept the grounds too cold. So wait on your straw mulching. It is extremely effective on bringing a good harvest together. And that's what I can say about that. And for soils, if you have new, still breaking down compost, all cucurbits love that because they love to have sort of that constant, like, working soil influence. Some people call it nitrogen, but it's basically microorganisms that are constantly working, and it's creating that heat, and they love that. They love to have that new compost, or like I said last year, I used the green hay, and it started breaking down. It was hot. It was even sort of smoldering a little bit, and the cucurbits loved it. They loved it. So if you have that new compost breaking down, that 1-month-old compost, or that 6-week, or that 2-month-old compost, put that right underneath your cucumbers right after they start growing, and they're just going to be happy. Side dress it with that. Again, how big is your garden? Do you do garden tours for YouTube? I don't do garden tours for YouTube, but if you subscribe to my that was the other. I'm going to say that now. The other housekeeping item. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, subscribe to it. Jimmy Videle-Veganic Grower. But on there, all last year, I did things like that. I did a garden tour. I showed you how the gardens were growing. I'm going to do it again as we get off into the season now. There's nothing much going on. I do have some beautiful pictures of dandelions I can show. But yeah, it's so I do have some of those videos that you can take a look at, Veganic. Now, how big is your garden? We did, up until this year, we gardened on just about a half an acre, which is unkar 1/4 of a hectare. This year, it's a little bit smaller. We actually let 4 of our 1,500 square foot gardens go back to the wild. So we actually cut it down by 1/3. So it's even less. So I would say it's about 1/3 of an acre now. What does that mean in terms of garden beds? We have almost 100 50-foot by 2.5-foot garden beds. So there you go. 12,000, maybe 15,000 square feet is what we have. So it's pretty big. It's a little bit bigger. It's a small farm. We're a seed farm, and we do sell a little veggie still, but it's a little bit bigger than your home garden. So there you go. You can also check us out. Check out our farm on lafermedelobe.com. There's information there about us. That's the name of our farm. And that should give you as much information as you need to know. Tip number 4. Plant flowers interspersed and in and around the cucurbit patches that flower earlier. Let wildflowers infiltrate, like dandelion, daisy, clover, wild strawberries, whatever you have regionally on the edges. Let the flowers go. The cucurbits are like it. And just like Rhonda and I figured out, if you're having a problem with pollination, well, plant your varieties of summer squash or cucumbers a week apart. Do a succession planting, and that will hopefully it'll take care of your pollinators. Now, what other plants do really well? What other flowers do really well that the bees like, and then they'll come into your patch? So some of our favorite perennial onions, either Egyptian walking onions, or we grow a perennial Japanese onion called hishiko. Chives, both garlic chives and regular chives. Wild marjoram does really well. Catnip, catmint, oregano. All of these will bring in all the native pollinators, and these are perennials that you can put on the side of your garden beds or sort of create perennial garden patches. Also, annual clover, yarrow. Some of the planted varieties that do really well that sort of flower right at the same time: buckwheat, cilantro, radishes, mustard greens, and of course, strawberries that we like to eat. So the more flowers, the better. Again, they're a pollinating necessary crop. If you do not have the pollinators, you're not going to get the fruits. So give the opportunity for all the insects to come in and feed on those other flowers and feed on the cucumbers and melons and squashes. All right. Tip number 5. When flowers begin forming on winter and summer squashes, to ensure pollination, sometimes it is necessary to hand pollinate before the wasps and bees and hoverflies arrive. How do you know? First of all, you locate the male flower. And take off the flower, remove the petals, and brush that stamen gently in the pistil of the female flower. One male flower will pollinate at least 2 females, sometimes even 3. You're going to want to do this when it's a little drier after a rain. You'll see that the pollen is quite wet. It won't work as well. But really here, what ends up happening for us is when all the bumblebees, like they're out now, they're on the Camarisiae flowers, they're on the dandelions. They were in the trees earlier, but there's going to be a time when the bumblebees specifically are going to go underneath and they're going to feed their babies. And they go down right about the same time that our first summer squashes and winter squashes are flowering. They come back again in mid-July, but for that first week in July, the last week of June, they're just not there. So I'm out there pretty much every morning, always walking through the cabbage, the squash patch. I mean, I'm out in my garden every morning anyway. And this is something else that sort of comes back before when I was talking my monologue before. If you're looking for something to give you joy, go out into your garden set at dawn. Just walk out there and be among the birds and the insects and the animals. And here we have leopard frogs that bounce around, and when it gets warm, the gopher snakes come out, and sometimes I'm hearing the foxes and the owls are still howling or hooting. And there is nothing more rewarding than going out into your own gardens at dawn and just being there among the plants in the silence. So anyway, I go into my cucurbit patch every morning because I want to eat zucchini as fast as possible. I want to have all those winter squashes pollinate, and I'm hand pollinating just like that. And it doesn't really matter. I mean, you can actually pollinate a zucchini plant. It doesn't matter whether it's a Cucurbitaceae pepo. We're going to talk about this in a couple of months when I talk about seed saving. It doesn't matter whether it's Cucurbitaceae pepo or Cucurbitaceae maxima or Cucurbitaceae machata. You can pollinate one with the other, and you're still going to get true to form whatever it was. So if I pollinate my Cucurbita pepo zucchini to a Cucurbita maxima sweet Georgia candy rocher winter squash, well, the winter squash is going to stay winter squash. It's not going to become some sort of hybrid zucchini. Now, where you're going to have where you would have a problem is if you cross 2 and then try to save seed. But for the first year, it doesn't matter. So that's why planting all your cucurbits kind of in the same area, your summer squashes, your winter squashes, all together, it's fantastic because the bees will then touch on all of them and everything will get pollinated once the bees come out. For the summer squashes, it's always very interesting to me when I go to farmers markets and I see organic farmers and they have these monster zucchinis that are really only good for baking or making, grinding up, shredding up and making breads. But me, I love gourmet summer squash, and it's something that you don't really find. Now they're starting to figure it out, and you're starting to see them like 15 centimeters, maybe 20 centimeters in length, but this is exactly what you should be going for. And because of the way cucumbers and summer squashes work specifically, the more you harvest them, the more that they flower, the more they want to produce. So if you start harvesting them at that smaller stage, it's for sure that as the plants get bigger, you're going to miss some, and you're going to have more than ample opportunity to get to find those huge monster summer squashes, which are quite fun when you want to freeze shredded zucchini for winter zucchini muffins or zucchini bread. or zucchini fritters. But if you harvest them all small, just when you know that they're still going to be good, they're going to be crunchy, they're even going to be a little bit sweet. Same with cucumbers. These are a gourmet treat. And if you haven't done this yet, you're missing out. I'm telling you, this is really, really fantastic. For winter squashes, you really want to wait to harvest them until they have turned their completely appropriate color. So if we're talking a butternut squash, you want to wait until they have turned that sort of tannish color. Classic to a butternut squash. If you're talking an acorn squash, you want them to be that dark, dark green color with underneath where it's sort of touching the straw mulch or the hay mulch. It's got a kind of an orange spot. You really want to wait to that point. And the biggest determining factor for a winter squash is when you knock on it, when you want it to be hard. It's like knocking on a door. And if it sounds like that, then you know it's ready. Now, interestingly, even though I said you should wait for the appropriate color, there are times where here up in the north, we just need to harvest them before it freezes, because if a winter squash freezes, then it's not going to be good. It's definitely not going to store. So we have experimented with taking them out even before the color is completely right, as long as they're rock hard. And we bring them in. And just like all winter squashes, you want to, and I'm going to actually talk about this in a minute, but I'll just mention it now. All winter squashes want to be cured. You want to put them in the sun for a good period of time. Anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks is not too long. And you turn them, and that's going to bake the winter squash. It's going to get that nice color. It's going to continue to ripen it off, and it actually works really well. The only ones you really don't need to do this for are sweet dumpling squash, delicata squash, or acorn squashes. Those can go right into your cool room and into your house and be stored for later. But all the other ones, butternut squash, curry squash, candy roaster squash, Guatemala squash, Algonquin squash, Long Island pie, all your pumpkins, they all want to be cured in the sun. Don't let them freeze. Make sure that they stay at least above freezing, but they want to be cured in a place. We use our greenhouse. You can use a tunnel. You can just put them right outside too. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that they're not getting too cold. Tip number 6, when melons and winter squash are fully formed, limit water. In the final stages of ripening melons, they only obtain their true sweetness if they ripen on the vine. Consider it like a cherry tomato. If you harvest a non-ripe cherry tomato and you bring it into your house and you try to ripen it up, the flavor is not the same as a vine-ripened cherry tomato. For the melons, it is absolute. This is why if you've ever gone to a grocery store, even a farmer's market, and you see those netted cantaloupes that don't have sort of the orange in between the nets. So then they're all netted. They're kind of a tannish color. And if you look inside the net, and they're really small, the holes. See that? They're really, there it is. Hey, whoa. Okay, there we go. They're really small, the holes. And inside the holes are kind of a greenish, tannish greenish. If they're not orange, then it's not going to be a ripe melon. This is how you know when you go to the store or when you go to the farmer's market and you try to pick a ripe melon. They sit like that out the field for a very, very long time. They're actually full size for weeks before they ever turn. But it's just because they're just waiting. They're waiting, they're waiting, they're waiting, they're waiting, and they're just waiting for that moment. Melons are so tricky because if you do not pull them off, as soon as you see that sort of inside of that netting where it's green, and I talk about this all the time in my book about melons, and you don't wait until it turns orange, you're just going to have a tasteless melon. It's going to be watery, it's going to be juicy, but it's not going to be sweet. You need to wait. But if you wait any longer than a day or two, it's going to become mushy and it might become too far past. It will actually start fermenting. That's how difficult melons are. That's why it's so hard to find. That's why you find it so difficult to find a ripe melon these days, because probably, everybody's just picking them when they think it should be ready based on a certain amount of days. I was told pumpkins get a little sweeter if you let them go through one frost before picking. I'd be very careful. They can get down to maybe like minus 0.1, but I have seen farms lose entire runs of of pumpkins because they left them out on the vine or put them in a place where it got below -1 and they just froze. They caved in on themselves. So I'd be very, very careful. What I do know about pumpkins and winter squashes is the longer that you keep them, the sweeter they do get. So it's more important that you store them for 2-3 months before you eat them. Now, certain ones are a lot sweeter than others. Sweet dumpling and delicata squash are almost always very sweet right away. Butternut squash, I find, and candy roaster squash, and even pumpkins, I find they only get sweet. They get sweeter as they're stored, but we never get them that cold. When we get them that cold, they do get cold rot. It's actually a fungus called cold rot. So be careful with that. I just wouldn't freeze them. I wouldn't even go for it. And what kind of sweetness are you talking about? If you want to make a pumpkin pie, you always add a little maple syrup, a little cane sugar anyway. So there you go. Then you can always sweeten up your pumpkin as you need. So when you're ripening your melons, you want to limit the water. And what this is going to do is it's going to shock them into ripening off that melon. It is also going to allow that sweetness to procure, because if you continue to water the melons, or say you get all of a sudden an inundation of rain as the melon is starting to turn color, it won't be sweet either. They are that fussy. It is that tricky. The same holds true for all the melons. So whether we're talking Charente, watermelon, honeydew, Gallia, Crenshaw, and every other one that you can think of, if they get water right at the time when they're ripening, it doesn't work. So if you have an irrigation system, as soon as you see them fully form, again, you can knock on them. If they're hard, then you know. If you can kind of press into them, then you know that they're still going. But if they're rock hard, you can just not even think about watering them again. I mean, you can go 2 weeks, 35 degrees. This is what I would do in Arizona, and you would have just the absolute sweetest melon of your life. Just make sure that they're 100% formed. Winter squash is the same, but for kind of a different reason. If they get rain right at the end of their time of ripening, then what's going to happen is no matter what you do, they're just not going to store as long. They're going to store for a few months, but usually, if we're lucky, we're still eating our winter squashes now. And I have one butternut squash and one spaghetti squash still. So what, we harvested in the end of September, and here we are 8 months later, and I still have winter squash that are good to go. That's because we got lucky and the rains didn't come. And of course, we don't irrigate. So you really need to watch the water. And again, put your winter squashes in the sun, and that'll help them cure. Which brings us to tip number 7, and a really cool topic, that all cucurbit plants love plant-based fermented teas. So today on YouTube, I just shared my YouTube video from last year on the absolute process of making plant-based teas. Here is my favorite and easiest way. Now, what plants do you use? I like comfrey, nettles, clover, yarrow, alfalfa, horsetail, vetch. You can use couchgrass. You can really use any perennial wild flora you have, and it will make a really amazing plant-based tea if you follow this simple method. So I take a 1 liter mason jar, a 1 quart mason jar. We cut the leaves when they're nice and growing in the spring. Like now, we have like these huge, beautiful comfrey bushes, and we have these beautiful nettle plants, and the yarrow is starting. We have beautiful clover plants. So we'll cut that, the stem and the leaves, and we'll pack that 1 liter jar completely full. Pack. And then we fill it. And if you have your rain barrel, use rainwater collection. It's always the best. Fill it completely to the top with water. Cap it, let it sit, not in direct sun, but in a warm place, kind of under a tree. If it gets a little morning sun, no big deal, for about 2 weeks. Then open the cap, smell it. If it smells bad, putrid, like, I don't even know, like you just, whoa, God, what am I smelling? Like fermented, and if it's bubbling, and it's ready. So you take a 5-gallon bucket, a 20-liter bucket, put in an old pillowcase, dump the entire contents into there, and straining out will be, or whatever you use to strain, an old sheet, an old t-shirt, whatever. And straining out will be 1 liter of that juice, of that liquid goodness that you just made. Me, I always dilute it 20 to 1. There are other farmers that say you can do 10 to 1, 15 to 1. 20 to 1 is good for me because then if I spray it on the plants, if I spray it on the leaves, I'm not really worried about burning them. Any less of a dilution, like 10 to 1, and if you spray it on the plants themselves instead of watering or they're splash up from the ground, you can get some burning of the leaves because it's a high concentrate of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium and micronutrients and the other macronutrients of like calcium and sulfur. So do it at 20 to 1 and you'll never have any problems. I like to foliar feed with them. So here in about a week or two, we'll create our first batch because by then our onions will have rooted in and it's time for them to get a nice shot of this foliar feed. And I've got a pump sprayer, and at night, right at the end of the day, say 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, I'll go around and I'll spray the foliar feed of this liquid fertilizer goodness there. Now, there are other people that also say, well, you should use, nettles in the beginning of the season because they're high nitrogen, and you should use comfrey maybe when they're flowering because it has a higher level of phosphorus. And, really, to me, what I've noticed is that it really doesn't matter. What we like to use is always a nettle comfrey mix. Sometimes I do mix in alfalfa or clover. And what I find is that the plants react the same than if I would have just used another. And I can't, the interesting thing is I can't really say that it works 100% for certain. Like I don't do a side-by-side comparison of the ones that I spray and the ones I don't, because it just seems like something the plants like. And so I give it to them. So, but what I can say is that done in this method, 20 to 1, I have never seen any adverse effects. It never seems like they didn't like it. So I guess for that, it seems pretty cool. Well, that's tip number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for today on cucurbits. I hope you learned something. I had a lot of fun doing this. They're going to be a little bit more like this in the future. It actually gives me a little bit of focus. Sometimes I can be, sometimes it can be a lot of information that I'm trying to get out. Unless I'm like really focused, it can be a little scattered. So. And yeah, Rhonda, I agree. It's lots of micronutrients. It makes them happy. Micronutrients are awesome. So are macronutrients. All nutrients and microorganisms are happy. So that's that. I have a few coming events. If you have any questions over the next 5-6 minutes, go ahead and put them out. Coming events. This coming May 25th, so it'll be Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. The Vegan Organic Network is having their Veganic Gardeners question time again. It's about 45 minutes. You can send them questions. There's always a brilliant panel of people talking about all sorts of fantastic, I think they like to call it their 24 karat advice, which I find quite cool. Anyway, Vegan Organic Network, they always do good stuff. They've been doing good stuff for a really long time. So if you have an opportunity, check that out. On the 27th of May, our co-founder of the North American Veganic Certification Standard Certified Veganic, Susan Craig, has her Learn How to Grow Your Own Food Veganically composting mini course. She studied under John Jevons, who's a biointensive grower living in Willits, California. She studied under him. She learned from him. And now she's giving courses on it. And I can say that she is a brilliant mind. She has a lot of good information to share. So that is this coming Saturday, the 27th of May, also at 2 p.m. Eastern or 11 a.m. Pacific. My next show is going to be the 27th of June. Again, it's Tuesday. Thank you all for looking at the date. They are now going to be on Tuesdays. I realized that by doing it on Thursdays, I was in 100% conflict with the Vegan Organic Network. And since there are so few of us doing these kinds of things veganically, there's no reason why we have to be on the same day at the same time. Didn't make any sense. So I decided to change my date. No problem for me. Hopefully it wasn't a big problem for you. And this is going to be all about managing your disease and your insect pressures. There'll probably be some stuff on there about pollinators. Again, it'll be the 7 best practices for how to manage diseases and the 7 best practices on how to deal with your insect pressures like slugs and snails. So that's going to be the next one, June 27th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern, 10:30 a.m. Pacific. So that is what I have for today. I want to thank you again. And if some of you have come on who weren't there before, again, if you have an opportunity and you've picked up my book or have read it from the library, it doesn't matter. See if there is a place that you can post a rating and a review. I would really appreciate it. It's very cool to see those ratings and reviews come out. It can be on Goodreads, which is a kind of a book reading site. It could be on your local bookstore. It could be any of the bookstore chains, including Amazon. Wherever there is a place to leave a book review or a rating, I would appreciate it. So that's it. So I want to say thank you. I want to say peace. I want to say have a great couple of weeks, and I very much hope to see you next time. Thank you very much for spending your quality time and your precious time with me today. Thank you. Bye-bye.